Hello everyone, today's tutorial is on how to make a cork leather rose. This pattern is based on a template and tutorial by Jennifer Maker on her rolled paper roses. I'll put a link to that in the description below. I've made a few modifications to fit it to cork leather, but it is mostly her template for this. So you can go to that if you want a little more information on it. Today we're going to be working with our DIY rose kits. In your kit, you're going to find 2 rose petals that will be mirror images of each other. You're going to find 2 leaves, again mirror imaged, and then 2 mirror imaged stem bases. This mirror image is because cork is different from one side to the other, so we're going to put these pieces together so that you have color on both sides. You will also find a piece of thicker 16 gauged wire, which will be your stem, and a thinner piece of wire, 22 gauge, that will help attach your leaf and support your leaf. Not in your kit, but what you will also need today is fabric glue. I like to use Fabri-Tac by Beacon. It's what I have found works best for me for cork. It holds things together really well with a strong hold, and it also dries fairly quickly. You will also need a pair of scissors because we're going to do a little bit of trimming. You will want a pair of small needle nose pliers to help you with the wire bending. This wire is fairly thin, it bends fairly easily, but the needle nose pliers will help. Optionally, if you want to trim anything, you'll want a pair of just some wire cutters. The only thing you'd really want to trim at the end is the length of your stem if you want it a little shorter, or if you don't want to wrap quite as much of your wire with your leaves. Okay, I think that's it for the kit, so let's get started. So I also forgot one other thing that you might need. You might also want some sewing clips or binder clips that will help you hold some of the pieces, especially the petals, in place while they're drying, so you don't have to sit there and hold it with your fingers while it dries, and you can move on to the next step. So little sewing clips or binder clips will help with that. Okay, so moving on, we're going to start with our petals. One of the petals we're going to trim up just a little bit to keep the bulk down. So you're going to have 2 petals. One is going to be going counterclockwise in its spiral. That one we're going to leave as is. So you want to use the one that's starting from this outer loop spiral, goes clockwise in. This is the one we're going to be trimming. So what I want you to do is I want you to go about 1/4 of an inch, and we're going to just trim 1/4 of an inch off the whole way around the spiral. This will help with the bulk when we start rolling it, so that it's not so thick in the middle, and it'll give us a better look to our rose as we roll. So you're just going to go around and trim off the inside of this spiral. This first part that we just trimmed are going to be those inner petals. And then as you get to this part, you're going to notice you have a lot less room. So what I want you to do when you get here is just start cutting this in half. So it's going to be a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch at this point, but just cut this spiral piece in half. And we're just going to continue around. All right, once you get to this last petal and this centerpiece, I actually want you to cut off that circle. Okay. So I kept trimming around, and I just trimmed right to the end and cut off this circle piece because we won't need this on the inner piece. That scrap you can just set to the side and throw away later. And now you have your untrimmed spiral and your trimmed spiral, and we're going to glue these back to back. Sorry, I'm bumping my camera. I want you to take your untrimmed spiral, and we're going to flip it over to the wrong side. I like to start with my outer petals. And I like gluing about 3 petals at a time, just so I don't have glue all over the place when I'm doing this. So remember, you've trimmed some of it, so you don't want to get glue all the way down or you're going to end up messy. You're already going to end up a little messy. It's going to get on your fingers. So get some glue on there. Make sure you go all the way to the edge with it. I tend to put a glob of glue and then use my glue tip to kind of spread it up to the top of the petals. That way I don't have a whole bunch extra that's going to seep out once I start pressing the pieces together. So press those first petals on there, line them up nicely, and then continue with the next ones. If you want to do more than 3 at a time, by all means you can do that. I tend to do it this way, just as you can see, the fabric tends to, tangle and lay on each other, so I don't want glue to get everywhere as I'm working. So I found that working in small areas gets less glue everywhere. Glue is also going to go on your table. So I probably should have said this before, but if you don't want glue on your table, you should probably have something down underneath. I don't mind it so much for this one because it just easily scrapes off. All right. As you get to these petals here that have a little more shape to them, these are going to be your outer petals. Jennifer's design for these is really spectacular in her petal shape. These outer petals, the ones that you'll actually see a little bit more once you roll it, are each different. She did a really nice job in this design. But once you get out to these petals, because the spiral portion of it is so small, you can just put the glue on the petals. As we roll it, we're going to have glue down on the spiral portion. So you don't have to worry about that coming apart. Oops. You want to make sure these get lined up as you're gluing. If you're using the fabric tack, like I said, it does dry pretty fast. So by the time you get to the end of it, these first ones that you glued are going to be pretty much where they're going to be. It is easy enough to pull them apart, but then you'll just have to re-glue them. But if you get things in the right place to begin with, you won't have to worry about that later. Okay, there our petal spiral is all glued together. Go back through and give everything a good kind of press. Make sure everything's where you want it to be. And we'll set that off to the side and let it dry just a little bit while we move on to our next step. In the next step, we're going to be working on the stem and stem base and the leaves. So you want to take your thicker wire, it's going to be 16 gauge, and you want to kind of straighten that out. Okay. Next, you'll need your needle nose pliers, and I want you to go down 1 inch to 1.5 inches down from the tip of your wire. And I want you to put a bend there. So a 90-degree bend. Try to see how it looks in the camera here. 90-degree bend here. All right, and then you're actually going to spiral this around, which is why it's nice to have the pliers to kind of hold on to. It doesn't have to be perfect spiral, perfect circle, but you want a good base here. Okay. You want that at 90 degrees to the rest of your wire, the rest of your stem, right? So this is what's going to sit at our flower base and what's kind of going to help support it. Your two, excuse me, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Your two stem bases here, I want you to choose one of them, doesn't matter which one, and you're going to turn that over. And you're going to slide your stem through the hole until you hit, so the spiral rests nicely on there. If your spiral's hanging out or anything like that, like you made it a little bit bigger, you know, twist it until you need to, till you can get it to where it needs to be so it's not showing on the outside of the stem base. If you need to kind of rearrange it just a little bit and rebend it, that's fine. Wire's nice like that. It rebends for us. Once that's in there, I want you to put a good amount of glue, well, not too much, but you know, glue that on there really well because you want your base to stay where you put it. And then go ahead and glue out all the way to the sides. Get all those edges all the way to the tip because you don't want your tips coming apart. This is another place your hands might get a little bit messy. Now, match up your star pieces here. Just glue that down right at the top, right on top of the wire, and on top of the rest of the star pieces. I like to press the tips together and then kind of run my fingers along the side. That will help get the extra glue off, and then also kind of help the tip, these smaller tips, stay where they're supposed to. All of these kits were cut with my laser, so they're quite precise. If you're trying to cut this by hand, or if you cut your pieces by hand, it wouldn't line up quite as nicely. But because it's been cut with a laser, there is going to be a little bit of charring on the edges, so it might make your fingers a little dirty. Comes right off, I promise. Alright, so once you get that nice and together, make sure you give the middle a good press to keep that wire secure, and you'll set that aside to dry. Next, we're going to do our leaves. To attach the leaves to the wire, to attach the leaves to the stem, we're going to put a little bit of wire in them. This will also help shape your leaf just a little bit if you want to bend it and move it. So you're going to take your smaller, thinner wire. This is 22 gauge wire. And you want to kind of straighten it as much as you can, because you're going to want to lay it down along this stem, which I know is pretty thin. So you want to make sure your wire is as straight as it can be, because that'll make it a lot easier to lay it down along that stem. So turn one of your leaves over, in case I didn't say that. And we're going to glue this wire just like we did the other one over here. Lay it on there as well as you can. Ooh, got some extra glob of glue there. Get that leaf glued on there. For the leaves, I like to glue this top one down, kind of like I do with the petals, and kind of go step by step. That will help that wire kind of be held where you want it for the top, so it doesn't move around on you. And I get my other leaves glued on there. And as much glue as you can on this stem. I know it's thin. Then try to get that wire right down the middle and just press it in there. If it comes out the side just a little, it's okay. And the cork will also can move with the wire. If your wire just insists on bending, just curve that stem. All right, get those leaves lined up. And there you have your leaf. Oh, looks like the wire's peeking out a little on that side. Let's fix that. There we go. So check both sides, make sure it looks good. This extra glue that you can kind of see on there, it will just rub off once it dries. So don't worry too much about that. All right, so carefully set that aside, let that dry. We'll move on to the next step, which is rolling the rose petals. Okay, it's time to make our rose. Go ahead and take your petals. They should be dry now. And you're going to turn it so that you can see the backing of the cork on this outer one. Okay. My glue is going to be a little bit slow, so I apologize. We're going to start with this layer, this side of the spiral, and start gluing right along where the backing shows. And again, you only want to go 5-6 petals, because you don't need all that glue getting in your way as you're trying to roll this, okay? And now you're just going to start rolling. You want to get a fairly tight roll. It's going to slip and slide just a little bit, so hold on to it as best you can. Once I get a section glued, I go back and I kind of push my cork so that this bottom is even, because I don't want it to start rolling up like a cone. Add another section of glue and continue rolling. You want to get a tight roll here, because you don't want your base to be too big. All that extra glue, I kind of spread out along this bottom with my finger to help hold it where it's supposed to be. Once you get up to these petals, the glue is going to go up on the colored portion of the cork. And that's just fine. Try to keep it off the petals as much as you can, because you want those to be able to splay out. Here's also where you need to kind of make sure that bottom stays flush. It has a tendency to want to slip down because it's thinner here. And it's also getting thicker in the roll. So you'll need to help kind of get it in its place. And hold it where it belongs. So this circle, get that nice and glued on there. Continue wrapping it around, trying to get it as evenly on there as possible. You're going to take this circle, you're going to press it down right in the middle. It's not going to cover the whole thing. It would if this were a paper flower, but with the cork being thicker, what you really wanted to do is cover those center pieces. See, I have lots of glue on my fingers. Let's see if I can get some of that off real quick. There we go. All right. Don't worry about what else is showing here because your stem base is going to cover that. All right. And look at that. We have a beautiful rosebud, not a bud, bloom. Okay, this needs to dry. I would give it 5-ish minutes to dry really well. It'll probably be mostly dry before that, especially if you're using the fabric tack. But I like to play it a little safer and make sure it's good and dry before I start trying to manipulate anything. I'm also pressing this center part down just a little bit to kind of get these outer petals shaped a little. Okay. While it's still dry, or while it's still wet and tacky, you can kind of do that. Don't press too hard. You don't want to press it out of shape and have to start over again, which I will say I have done. So be careful with that. At this point, whoops, if you want, you can take a couple sewing clips and kind of clip a few of these petals together. This one doesn't require it as much as, say, the peony does. This holds its shape with the petals slightly better. But sometimes, especially this last petal, I like to just make sure it stays where it's supposed to. Alright, so set this aside, let it dry, and once it's dried, we'll move on to our next step. Okay guys, it's time for the final steps. Hopefully your rose blossom is fairly dry now. You don't want that slipping too much. First, we're going to start with the base, and we're going to add the leaves. If you've made the peony or you've watched the Cork Leather peony video, it's the same process for adding the leaves there as it is here. I want you to put the base of the cork of the leaf right against the stem, and you're going to wrap the wire of this leaf around the stem. You want to get a nice tight wrap. If you need to have your pliers to kind of tighten it in there. Okay, and just continue wrapping. Now, I gave you a nice long piece of wire here. If you want to wrap at least 1/2 inch to get this nice and on there well. But if you don't want to wrap all of your wire, feel free to get some wire cutters and cut off that extra, which I think I might do here, because that's a good wrap there. Can you see that? It's kind of hard. The wires are the same color. Okay, so I'm going to get my wire cutters. I'm going to cut off just a little bit of this. I'm going to finish wrapping it. And then this end can be a little sharp, so make sure you get it tucked around well, so it's not going to poke you or anyone else, because while roses have thorns, we don't need ours to. Here we are. So you can see now, you can kind of, because the wire is in there with that leaf, your leaf will bend and can be shaped a little bit. Okay? All right, so we got that leaf on there. You can position it how you like. Be careful here that you don't pull the cork away from the wire. It should be fairly dry, but it will pull away if you tug too hard. All right, so our next step is to attach our rose blossom to the stem. So you want to get your glue back out. And go ahead and put some glue here on the center portion. All of that needs to be glued. And then go up. I like to go about halfway up the star portion, because I like some of my stem base to, you know, go away from the rose blossom, kind of like it does in nature. Okay. So we have this piece here at the bottom where the round portion didn't cover all of it, but you're going to cover that with your stem base. So kind of position your flower so that that's covered as well as you can. I like to get one of my pieces to go over where the flower ended to kind of help cover that. And then you're just going to mold the stem base up around the blossom. Now here's where, again, it's helpful to have clips if you want them to help hold this shape. If you don't have clips, you're going to have to sit here for a little bit holding this shape. So I'm going to grab my clips. Of course, they're clear over here. There we go. I'm going to clip a couple of these in place. Okay. So you can see how these come out to the side. You can kind of see them. And since I didn't glue them all the way up, they will turn out just a little bit, which I like. If you are going to glue all the way up, make sure you kind of pay attention to where they're going to go, that they go over a petal. Like you notice this one here doesn't go over a petal completely. So if you had glue on that, you wouldn't be gluing it to anything. Okay, so again, let that dry. Either clip it or hold it in place for a good, well, if you're holding it, hold it probably for a good 2 or 3 minutes. And then still set it aside for another 5 or so to make sure that it's nice and dry before you try to start manipulating it. I'll let this dry for a little bit and then I will pop back on here and show you the finished results. Alright guys, it's been about 10 minutes of my glue drying here. You can see that base is on there nicely now. And we have a pretty rose. You can manipulate the leaf, the center one here, bend it how you want it. If the stem is too long for whatever you have planned for it, it can easily be trimmed up. Alright, and there you have it. These are a great way to decorate, a great gift to give. I have other flower tutorials. Make a flower bouquet and enjoy. Thanks for watching, guys.